Thank you, Mahat. Thanks for having me. It's wonderful. Of course, it's not quite the same as visiting Esade. I've been there, I can't remember, years ago. Very nice place, of course. My sister lives in the vicinity, so that's always a nice reason to visit. Thanks for the long introduction. It reminds me that I'm quite old by now. And yeah, so the podcast, I guess it's called This IS Research. Most people say this is research. I don't know. It seemed like a good name at the time. I probably wouldn't pick it again. All right, that's not why we're here. I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about a paper we've been working on for many years, and which is not just a paper, but it's really the start of a real program, of an actual entire program or body of work, which looks at a little bit what you said, Maha, which is one of the interests that I have is not only the opportunities that come from digital innovation, but also the limits and the boundaries. And one such boundary that we find fairly fascinating is the human body. And so we started looking at some issues that flow from digital technologies getting closer and closer to or even into our body. And we started working on this with Johanna, who you'll meet in a second, a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And since then, we've been starting to take up more empirical work. One piece of work where we also involves Marta Stelmachak, who's also here, which is a fantastic program. And we'll present the first bits and pieces of that work at ISIS. Anyway, enough of a pitch. Yeah, so usually I bring that slide. You've had it as well. So I do mostly stuff with firms, as I said, on opportunities and boundaries of digital innovation. So when I say boundaries, as I said, this one here is about the body as a boundary. I've done work on physical aspects, physical resources, physical technologies, physical objects as boundaries, and environmental boundaries of digital innovation. So you get a sense of about what I mean with boundaries here. But in this work, I want to start by showing you a little video, and I hope that the audio comes across. So on the right hand side, you see Johanna here, and on the left hand side is a gentleman from Melbourne whose name is Adrian. And Adrian is a diabetic. And I just want to, this is part of actually data we collected, and it's quite a fascinating little excerpt from one of the interviews that we did. And I'm trying to play it, and let me know if you don't hear anything, please, because that's quite important what he's saying.
You think, wow, that's okay.
Can you hear that? Okay, you can hear that. All right, let me start again. It's just a minute or so.
But you think, wow, that's okay. Something terrible happens, I'll just pull it off.
Yeah.
But this is a step further because it's a little device stuck to my arm with no buttons. So I don't even, it by itself is just a very, what's the word? I don't know. It's a kind of, it's just the insulin pump. It doesn't have any interface on it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can only use it through my phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only use it through my phone, right? So there's a lot of trust there, but then there was also a really huge trust moment, maybe 2 to 3 years ago, where I decided to start using this app, which does the automated decision making.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of trust because it could make a dumb decision. And in the most horrific example, I guess, it could give me enough insulin to kill me, right? So it is a big deal. And I guess the thing that made it even weirder is that this app is not prescribed by a doctor. It's actually, I don't know if I told you about this at the conference, but it's built by, what I say is a community of diabetic nerds.
Oh no, it just stopped. All right, that's maybe enough. 1 second, my son is here. Juli, ich muss auch. Nein, wir müssen danach zum Zahnarzt. Sorry, I'm alone with my 3 boys, so they'll probably pop in every now and then. So this excerpt is fascinating, I think. Yeah. So Adrian is, as I said, he's a diabetic, and he uses what's called a closed loop artificial pancreas system, which basically consists of 2 devices. what is an automated glucose monitoring system, so something that measures the blood level, the sugar level in your blood, and an insulin pump that is then fed by an algorithm, and depending on the dosage and the algorithm and sort of what it produces, releases insulin into your bloodstream autonomously. And so, as he said, one of that device is on his body, the other one is literally in his body. And as he said, depending on how that system is configured, it can kill him. Yeah. So if there's an algorithmic error, that can kill him. However, at the flip side of that is it's actually working a lot better than what the normal process would have been, which is diabetic patients have to regularly, manually measure their blood sugar. If you know what that looks like, they usually have a little prick and they prick themselves and then they do a little test. And then in case they have to regulate and give themselves a little insulin injection. So that's a manual, it's a laborsome, it's a painful activity, and the system does it much better. And there's a lot of elements here. He talked a lot about trust. He also mentioned the fact that this is actually an open source development, right? So it's a bunch of, he called them diabetic nerds. So a bunch of grassroots activists with some IT skills that build a system because the commercially available medical solutions are not good enough. Yeah, so not good enough. Hence, there is an entire grassroots initiative which you can find under the hashtag We Are Not Waiting. Hashtag We Are Not Waiting. They're not waiting for the commercial medical providers, the Olympus of the world, the buyers of this world to release something. He also mentioned that it's not approved. Yeah, so there's many aspects to this, and they all center around the fact that we have a piece of digital innovation that is on/in our body, and therefore not just has informational consequences, such as when a bad algorithm gives you fake news or bad information so you make a bad decision. These are systems that can literally impact your quality of life, that can literally kill you, right? So it has bodily impacts that directly, not just indirectly, not like cognitively, informationally, but directly, physiologically or bodily impact your life. And that's what we found fascinating. So when we started talking to him many years ago, we started thinking about them. And we very quickly came to this term, which you may have heard, the Internet of Bodies. Yeah, we had the Internet of Information, we had the Internet of Things. And now when you read up on this, you see that people claim we see the rise of the Internet of Bodies. And there's lots of stories here. There are sort of digital wireless pacemakers that for people that have, sort of heart issues. There's also other things. There's things in gaming like the Tesla suit. I'll show you this. The person you see on the left-hand side is a performance artist from Australia. His name is Stellark. He does lots of weird bodily performance art. And the example that you see here is from 1995, where what he did is he connected all the muscle parts of his body with electrodes to the internet. And this is 1995, so a long time ago. So whenever someone somewhere sent an email, he would get a little shock. Yeah, so like a little ping, and the ping would produce an electric shock to his muscle cells. So he was on stage, and of course, it's probably not as much volume of information flowing through the internet in 1995 as it now, but it basically had all sorts of involuntary movements. And his whole point of that performance back then was to show that we're reversing. It's not the people using the internet, but the internet using the people or using the body, right? So all of this is connected to this notion that we have digital innovation that are not just in our palms, in our hands, but are on or in our body or literally connected to our body, and therefore reach a very different level of consequence, namely what we would call bodily consequences, which we think is fundamentally different from behavioral consequences, informational consequences, or even cognitive sort of consequences, but literally directly connected to the functioning of the living shell of our human body. So that's what we're talking about. So with bodily digital devices, we mean digital connected artifacts, right? The ICTs, that is in direct bodily contact, meaning on or in the body, and whose function is of particular nature, namely that these devices sense and process body data, and they generate direct bodily responses with physiological impact. So typically people think about wearable devices. Yeah, so like you think about a Fitbit, which senses and processes bodily data, like your steps or stuff like that. but it doesn't, it only to a limited extent generate actually bodily responses. The only bodily responses is that you get a little buzz. A lot of that is just behavioral information, like it shows you how many steps you've taken and so forth. So that's not quite what we mean, right? What you see here on the left-hand side, this is this automated glucose measuring tool. It's called Libra. You can just get it in a pharmacy, in fact. And Tidepool is the app. That's an open source app. So actually, I have one of these at home. So that would be something that measures things like your glucose level in your blood. In the middle, that's a sleep tracking device. On the right-hand side, you see a Tesla suit. And the second to the right is a little app called Headspace, which is supposed to help you with, calm your nerves, reduce your stress, help you relax. But actually, I put that here on purpose because that doesn't actually fit the definition. This does not generate a direct bodily response, not directly. It does so indirectly. It gives you information, like soothing voice and music and whatnot and exercises. And if you follow them, you can actually create a physiological impact, like reduce your stress levels and lower your blood pressure and your stuff like this. But it doesn't do so directly, right? So this would be a counterexample. This is a slide from the many different review rounds we've been through so far. At some stage, we tried positioning these bodily digital devices. The key point is that we wanted to separate them from other ones, right? So I said here, look, we have devices that have something to do with the human body. Some of them are external to the body. Yeah, so fall detection systems, for examples, are systems that kind of like apps, and they have a bodily function, like they want to help you to see if you're tripping on the stairs or somewhere else, and then in case give you a response that prevents a bodily impact, namely the damage from falling. But it's not in the body, it's not on the body, it doesn't directly generate such a response. It's like an app that measures information and gives you an informational response. That's not what we mean. So this is one of the ones that we had. One of the interesting ones are artificial pancreas. That's the example from Adrian that I showed you. Feedback gaming technologies, haptic suits. That's the Tesla suit. I'll show you this. Smart implants. There's things like digital taste synthesizers, which are digital devices that you can put on your tongue, and electronically it creates a taste sensation that tastes like the 4 or 5 basic senses, like sour, sweet, and whatever the other ones are. So these are devices that we mean, and there's a whole bunch of those. Yeah. So posture correction system, there's smart exoskeletons, smart pacemakers, deep brain stimulation system, bionic prosthetics, robotic pills. All of these are bodily digital devices that actually fit our definition. Now, I want to make 2 notes about them. So these are not necessarily new developments. We've had such technologies for a while, and people have been thinking about their impact for quite some time. See Stellak, who did this performance art 30 years ago. The thing that's different is that, first of all, we see more and more of these. Second, they used to be very restricted, particularly to the medical domain. And what is germane to the medical domain is that these were highly regulated sectors. Yeah, so we had digital technologies in medical devices that are in or on the body and have bodily functions for a long time, but they would have to go all sorts of medical regulation and testing, FDA approval, all sorts of randomized control trial, 10 years waiting time until they get released. The example of the smart the closed-loop artificial pancreas system that Adrian is using, or the Tesla suit, are examples where this is not the case. So they're moving out of the highly regulated areas into everyday consumer tech, into less regulated areas like just general tech or consumer technology or gaming technology. That's not regulated at all. So we see more and more of these things. Of course, we have more and more sensors, more and more technological power, making these devices more capable and so forth. And we haven't even talked about AI, so in sort of giving them even more agency and control over what they're doing. So one more example, when we started working on this, which was very brand new. I'm not sure how many people would now know the Tesla suit, which is commercially available, sort of out of the gaming sector, but it has lots of applications outside of gaming as well. Again, this is actually a Tesla commercial, okay? So let me see if I can get that applied.
Digital interface, the only of its kind, designed to simulate experience and accelerate mastery in the physical world. Tesla suit inputs haptic feedback, to any area of the body, from gentle touch to feelings of physical exertion and temperature, and outputs motion capture and biometrics. Tesla Suit accelerates VR training with performance monitoring and sensation. Users experience scenarios as though they've lived them. In the physical world, errors in operating procedure can be costly. Trainers are a limited resource, and mastery requires endless input and repetition. With Tesla Suit, trainer inputs are embedded in the simulation. Users train with autonomy, and mastery is achieved with less repetition by programming operating procedure into muscle memory.
So again, that's probably enough of a it's obviously a commercial, but what this system does, it can obviously sense a lot of bodily information while you're wearing it, but it can create direct physiological impact. It can throw a punch, so to speak. So if you punch in a virtual reality, the septic suit simulates haptic feedback. Probably not of the same vicinity, but you'll feel it, right? If you made it, you would notice this. It can simulate heat. It can simulate a lot of physiological responses to the body. And it began as an immersive suit to highlight immersion in video games, but it actually has a lot of applications in mission critical and safety critical systems. Yeah, you saw firefighters, you see police escorts, etc. And there's a variety of firms. There's a firm in Finland, for example, called Vajo. They basically do the same thing, more high-end for military purposes, basically only, right? So this is serious stuff where people do very, very advanced, augmented or entirely virtual reality simulations of combat, of warfare, of all sorts of very critical situations through these types of technologies that are bodily. So all this goes to show, sorry, you're not interested in this. How do I get out of this? Sorry, I'm not very good with, there we go. Oh, sorry, I'm not good with, let me bring up this slide. Here we go. This is the next slide. So all of this prompted us to basically say, like, we need to look at this. Yeah, so we need to think about and theorize about the connection between digital technologies when in connection with the human body. Yeah, so this, when you look at this in the literature, this is not the first. We're not the first to do this. Other people have done this, and many people use the term somatic turn. Yeah, the somatic turn comes from the word soma, the material shell of the human body. Yeah, so our shell, the very physical human sort of parameters of our existence, which shape our senses, which shape our cognition, and shape everything that we do. And now we have situations where we have more and more technology being able to sort of impact that, interact with that, not just sort of mediated in a mediated or indirect way, but in a very, very direct sort of way, right? So, and there have been discussions on this, on the somatic term for the last 10, 15 years, roughly. For example, there's a lot of this stuff in legal scholarship, because they do have cases where computer code damages the human body, and then the question is who's at fault and who's to blame and who's to pay for it all. In medicine, there has been a long and very mature conversation. The interesting bit there is there's basically two main ones. One of them is the idea of building digital twins of humans. Yeah, so sort of like you have your digital counterpart where we feed all the bodily data in, and that could do the same thing what we now do with digital twins in construction manufacturing, namely do maintenance, do analytics, do repair, do optimization, do predictive stuff, right? So that's the vision of human digital twins. The other interesting bit is the issues of body technology connections. Put it very simply, if you put electronic devices into your body, they corrode, so the blood and all the bodily fluids aren't actually very good. So these sorts of very physical connections between electronic stuff, yeah, like our phones or whatever, and the human body and whatever goes on in our human body aren't actually all that easy. So it sort of makes you think of Star Trek, Next Generation and Data, and his attempt, for the older generation here, his attempts to put skin on his on his robot. So same thing. So this is actually happening in real life. There are technology AI ethics sort of discussions around bodily impact of digital technologies. In IS itself, it's much more limited, right? So in IS, we do have attention to human and bodily aspects, but they're more indirect and they're more the context sometimes. Of course, there's work on wearables, for example, but much of that is actually, so for example, Tabitha James does a lot of that stuff. But she looks a lot about the psychological, behavioral, and informational aspects of it, like sort of what information system is a wearable and what information is changing the way that we think, that we feel, and how we act, which is not quite the same. Yeah, that we also have a work that looks at body-centric or body mimicking technologies. So anthropomorphic agent design, for example, where we study how people build technologies that looks like humans, acts like humans, is perceived like humans and so forth. And there's also work, including work that we've done ourselves on sort of bodily experiences of technologies. My favorite paper is by Leona. In the pandemic, she did an ethnographic study of 24 online wine tastings. Basically, she sat at home with Zoom, lots of red wine, and wrote a paper about it, which is really cool, actually, if you think about it, because there's multi-sensory experiences involved in wine tasting. It's not just the taste, but it's the smell, it's the look, it's the haptics of it all. And some of that gets carried into digital formats easier, and others do not. Yeah, Jesse Palou and Emmanuel Monod, they did work on, augmented reality museum exhibitions. We, Johanna and I, we did work on all sorts of sensory experiences like, gin tasting, cooking classes, yoga classes, where we have more than just audio and video, if we have more senses involved and still want to do certain digital innovations. But the entire entanglement, so like a holistic view of the technology in relation to the human body, there's very little. There's an interesting paper in the European Journal from a couple of years ago that sort of made the point that we forget the human body, and kind of this is what we're doing or trying to do in this paper as well. Now, over the years and over the course of the revisions, we changed or the way that we try to theorize about these, what we call entanglements, right? The sort of intricate connection between the human body and body technologies in many ways. And this is sort of what we settled on. So in a way, it's like a zigzag process where the big takeaway is that we use both inductive and deductive elements. It's not empirically based, but it has empirics. It's not, derived from a grand theory, but we do derive some stuff from meta theories. So we're doing a zigzag between sort of some empirical insights, vignettes from the literature, from sort of meta theories or meta frameworks that we use to organize our thoughts. And so we sort of zigzagging through that. I'll show you an example of what that looks like, right? So it's sort of developing an emergent idea about this, then actually developing theoretical concepts that allow us to talk about it, and then sort of even try to reflect / validate the sort of the framing that we're suggesting as a whole. So one of the things we did is we tried to find vignettes. I wouldn't call them case studies. They're just mini cases. Yeah. So when we, for example, Adrian, as a user of such a smart closed loop artificial pancreas system. So one of the things we did is we tried to find bodily digital devices. We tried to find people that would use them and have some experience with them. And then we would, talk to them a few times and actually, even did formal interviews. But these are just, single cases and, a couple of interviews, not really a case study per se. Right. So I showed you an example from Adrian and his use of this closed loop system. We also talk to people who do work with sleep tracker wearables. For people that don't know this or who have snoring fathers like me, usually what you do is you go in a hospital and in one of these sleep labs, and they put all sorts of weird things on you, weird measurement devices, and then they say, "Oh, just sleep like you would at home." And then they just see whether you have sleep apnea or some other sleep disorder. And it's a really weird experience because it's not like sleeping at home because you're connected to machines and all that. So there is work, like for example, from Iceland, from Reykjavik, where they're trying to have more, more usable, more user-friendly, wearable devices that you can just take home. Put on your head and or rest on your chest, and then sort of does the same thing reasonably good, right? It's called the Sleep Revolution Project. And it also is a bodily digital device. In this case, it's very loosely connected. It's on your body, but it's not really, like tied to it. It's not medically inserted into it. Is not so. But it has all sorts of weird implications as well. So that's another vignette we looked at. We did talk to people that built these human digital twins, like for example, Professor Laubenbacher from University of Florida, who's where one of the big labs is where they're building. They call them immune digital twins. So the idea of building this digital twin for very personalized medicine and personalized preventative medicine at scale. I'm mentioning this vignette because this is one where we later discarded because it doesn't quite fit our definition anymore. So we have sort of, if you want, we have some counter examples or boundary cases as well. We did talk to people that use the Tesla suit, which isn't actually all that simple because by the time we looked for them, they were still $50,000 a pop. So we didn't find a lot of people that would have one. We did find some. So, for example, there's a serious game research groups where they do have a Tesla suit and they do experiments with them, and to see what the haptic bodily responses that the suit provides, what it does to people as they're using them. So, for example, they do studies with policemen and also with military, like novices or cadets in training, and how they are simulating high pressure situation. Right, and then seeing what that does when for the first time they not only think that they're in a simulation that is stressful, but they actually physically feel the stress because it's exerted through the system. So this is sort of the empirical basis. So, and we looked at them, we talked very broadly to them, and we sort of it took several of the themes and the concept that emerged from that. And I think that at the beginning, that little excerpt that I showed you from Adrian, that's very rich and powerful. There's lots of stuff going on. Yeah, whether it's about trust, it's agency, control, feedback loops, lots of things are happening. And so we sort of started from that. Now, we needed something to organize all of that. And through the course of multiple revisions, we ended up using, thinking of it as essentially being a fairly complex dynamic system. It's basically a system theory where we have at least two different types of entities in our system, the human body and the digital device. And they both have properties. There is interaction between these elements. There are emergent properties that emerge from the interaction between these elements. Yeah, so ultimately we settled on a paper by Dionysius and Alan Lee, who wrote a paper about how to do good systems theorizing. It's kind of useful because it basically, takes good old systems theories from the 60s and dissects it into 6 requirements, or sort of 6 meta-level theory requirements they would have to have, right? For example, any system has a boundary to an environment. So in our case, it would mean what? If we say, look, the body technology thing is a system, what's the environment of that? Yeah, and how do we characterize the environment of this? Then we have every system has to communicate. The elements in the system have to sort of exchange and interact somehow. How's that working? There are particular types of system that are self-referential and autopoietic. Yeah, self-referential means that the elements in the system gather information from themselves about themselves, which is definitely the case with bodily digital devices. Autopoiesis means that it's a self-reproducing system. Now that's a very interesting one to think about with bodily digital devices. If you think about the closed loop artificial pancreas system, you have an automated insulin pump that is literally in your body and it's surgically implanted. Now that's interesting. First of all, you can't put it in yourself, which also means you can't take it out yourself. You have to go to a doctor to do that. Second, this is still an electronic system, means it needs energy, it needs power. It runs on a battery, means you have to recharge or swap the battery. Third, it has insulin. You have to refill the insulin, right? So there are some very bodily aspects to making the system autopoietic, or in particular, in this case, it's obviously not strictly autopoietic because it can't do that itself. It's not like in the Matrix where the technology feeds off the energy from the human, but there are systems that do that. There are some digital electronic systems that generate, or that capture energy that you do through pedometrics, through walking, and the energy that your body is producing, right? So there are ways you can think that you could have some sort of body technology systems that are in fact autopoietic, even though the closed loop pancreas is not one of them. So this is what we took. Basically, this is a very deductive process. We took these as requirements and then we mapped them basically to all the little concepts that emerge from our empirical analysis and our, thinking about the literature and so forth. And in the end, we got some sort of mapping. For example, body device assemblage, which is the name that we give to the system that is produced out of the interaction between a human body and bodily digital devices. So the assemblage of these two elements, the system, that usually has a particular goal. It has an intent. Now, it's not an emergent intent. It's not, it's the designed intent. So bodily digital devices are designed to pursue certain goals. These goals could be different. So in very simple sense, you can think of them, some of them are reactive. They are designed to react to certain bodily data that they're sensing. Think of it like it reaches a threshold, and when it hits that, it does something. The closed-loop pancreas is a reactive system. Yeah, it measures in some intervals that you can configure. It measures your glucose level, and once that hits a particular threshold, it does something about it. It's not preventive. Yeah, there are other systems that have preventive intents. So they measure things, they measure bodily information, and so they may take action before something happens, not after something happens. The system environment distinction that's important to such a system, in this particular case, the most salient of that is the linkage between the body and the device. So how is the device actually connected to the human body to form such an assemblage? And that's a huge difference if I have a system that is on my body and now it's not, versus a thing that is in my body and versus a thing that's in my body surgically implanted, right? So for example, this glucose monitor, it's in my body, at least part of it. It's a little needle prick. It's really weird. If you ever do this yourself, you have to pinch yourself with this electronic device and it goes into your body, but you can just rip it off. If you have the insulin pump in your body, only a doctor can take. You can't take it out. If you have a pacemaker in your body, you can't take it out. A Tesla suit, you take the zipper, you take it off, right? So the linkage has some important differences. And of course, you can very quickly think about different implications that would flow from that in terms of malfunction, in terms of volition, in terms of sort of like how free are you and how much control do you have over the assemblage in which you're in. Yeah, how free are you to make any changes to that, to sort of exit the assemblage, decouple yourself from the device and so forth. System theories have a transformation process, how they sort of process body information to outputs. In the case of our body device assemblage, the interesting bit is, of course, that bodily digital devices, they sense bodily information, from information in your bloodstream to your steps, to your heart rate, to whatever, and they transform that into a bodily response. Now, this process of actualization, the interesting bit there is whether this actualization is symbolic. So we do have a physical bodily output, but that's a symbolic, a cue that allows us to, to do something about it. Like when the system, like when the Tesla suit, punches me, which is, it's just a material response, but it's meant to be symbolic. It will never kill you, right? If it simulates that someone kills you or stabs you, it will sort of stab you, but of course not the same, right? So it's a symbolic response. A wearable device like a Fitbit or a smartwatch or stuff like this, they give you symbolic responses, like the buzz or the beep or they do certain things. But there are other ones that are very material, where the actualization is concrete and material, in some cases even biochemical, where they put stuff into your blood or into your brain or wherever it sits. Yeah, where it changes your heart, where it changes your brain, where it changes to whatever. The aspects of self-reference and autopoiesis, to us, they translate to the important, or they don't translate, but to us, the body device assemblage, the interesting questions are around agency in a very simple way of like, who is the main actant? Who's in charge of deciding what goes on in this assemblage? Can you, so in very simple terms, I can be in an assemblage with a bodily digital device where I instruct it to do something to my body, or I'm free to take it off, or I'm still in charge. I can push a button and say it releases something into my blood, or the agency rests with the device. So the agency, the autonomy sort of sits with the device, that initiates based on some algorithmic and sort of algorithms and data that feed into this, and that initiates the bodily response with or without my intervention or my command. Okay, so again, the closed loop artificial pancreas system has a device agency. The system does it. You set it up before you go to sleep. For example, there's something that's called the night mode, which basically means like, please monitor my glucose levels while I'm sleeping, and in case, adjust it. You're not doing anything. In fact, you're trying to sleep and let the system take over control over your body. Yeah, that's how that system operates. So the agency is not with the human, but it's with the technology. And the other aspect, and I mentioned this already, this autopoietic, or the extent to which it can be autopoietic. In our case, we call this autarky. Like, so to what extent is this body device assemblage depending on or external resources or third-party resources? Like, as you need a doctor to take it in or out, you need to take it out to replace the battery. It needs certain, to create a response, it needs, I don't know, liquids or other ingredients that you have to refill. These are not fully autark systems. They are sort of dependent, right? So you can have external dependencies ranging to self-sufficiency. Communication, how the system communicates in this particular case with the user, the owner of the human body. That's the question of transmission. So, and that's another interesting one, because you can say, look, there are some systems that continuously collect and process and output information. Think about your smartwatch that measures your sleep and your heart rate basically all the time. There are other ones that are more discrete, like in intervals or in regular time frames or stuff like this. Another aspect that you don't see in the table is, where is it transmitted to? This is a digitally connected device. And several of these devices, they upload data to some sort of cloud or some platform somewhere where you may have access, but maybe also your parents, maybe your doctor, maybe someone else. Yeah. So for example, again, the closed loop, which is my go-to example, as you may have imagined, for underage kids, well, the app would allow your parents to monitor the insulin and glucose level of their kids while they're wherever they are, which is a great feature, but it's also kind of spooky. Yeah. And of course, any system has an emergent outcome. Yeah, and out of the interaction of the elements, that's key to systems, of course. And in our case, what we propose is happening here is that these body device assemblages with these bodily digital devices, as they are used by humans in different situations, with different intents and different forms of agency and autarky and actualization and linkages, they produce what we call somatic entanglements, meaning that there is a way in which your human body, your body is becoming deeply entwined and entangled with the device in different ways. And they can be from very voluntary, very sporadic, very beneficial to entanglements that are characterized by mutual or one-sided dependencies and so forth. Right. So let me talk about this last part. So the first part is, this is what then the idea looks like, right? So we have an assemblage, which is a system consisting at least of the human body and a body digital device, that are in a system where the device creates a response to the body, and it reads or it senses bodily signals. And you can characterize this assemblage through the different forms in which intent, sustainment, actualization, linkage, agent transmission, what they look like. So this system can be configured, this assemblage is configured in many different ways. You may or may not have noticed that when I talked about the different conceptual dimensions, I always thought of them on a spectrum from one end of the continuum to some other end. So for example, intent could be from preventive to reactive. Agency can be more on the human side or more on the device side, or it can be self-sufficiency to external dependency. So these are not categories. It's more, each of them are more like a spectrum, and then you can range to and from, right? So that's quite important. But there are things like you can conceive sort of natural endpoints of these spectrums for all of them. Right, and this assemblage, the emergent outcome that it produces, is what we call somatic entanglement. And as I said earlier, the assemblage itself, of course, occurs also in environment. And the things that we think is important about the environment is, first of all, how is it regulated? Now, I mentioned earlier that if you think of body device assemblage as medical context, one key distinction of that environment is that it is regulated, and there are laws and there's policies and norms and checks and whatnot and guidelines around that in place. So the Tesla suit is not the same as a smart pacemaker. One is a medical device, and there's lots of procedures and safety and guidelines and laws and stuff in place. And the other one is, a 15-year-old can buy it in a shop if they're rich enough. Yeah. So second, the task setting could be different, and that's important because, as I said earlier, they come out of this medical domain for very clear designs and purpose and tasks, which is basically keep the person alive. But they could also be in different types of task settings. So gaming, culture, performance, arts, training, education. We see them in quite a lot of areas, and of course, these tasks come with their own unique task goals and task requirements. The users can be different. One obvious ways in which users can be different is that some people have a somatic, a bodily handicap. They could be handicapped people. So people that don't have a limb, have a heart that doesn't quite work, whatever it may be. Diabetic patients, and of course, there could be physically healthy people that still have different physical abilities. Of course, right? So one way in which that is where you see this same type of assemblages, if you think about professional sports and the question of whether or not professional athletes should or should not be allowed to compete with people that have prosthetic limbs. What's his name? Pistorius in the Olympics, the big legal case many, many years ago. That's an example of that. Yeah. And of course, there's infrastructure, third-party complementers. With that, we mean some of these devices, some of these assemblages, all of that is connected to the cloud. The smart loop system is actually closed loop, which means that there's nothing going out of the body and out of the app to somewhere else. But there's other situations where, maybe it's all in Google, maybe it's all in wherever. Maybe other parties have access to it, maybe they don't. Maybe it's your guardians, maybe it's your doctors, maybe it's someone else. So all of this characterizes the environment. What I want to get to, one second, real quick. Hi Oski, ich muss noch was arbeiten.
Ein Donnerstag und
Ja, hast du
ein Digital.
Yeah, geh dich mal ausruhen, ja? Und dann hör unten was, ich komme nicht weg. That's the second one. Now you need the third one to show up. All right, so the key outcome that we're interested in is this form of entanglement. That was tricky for us, and we still don't think we quite nailed it. So our fourth or fifth round revision is really still on this dependent variable, so to speak. Now, the idea is that, well, we're creating some mutualistic relation. Okay, so there is some sort of way in which now the device and the body becomes intertwined, entangled. How do we characterize this? Our idea now was that we look at basically mutualism is from biology, where when you think about symbiotic relationships between species. Yeah, so in biology, we have mutualism, that consideration in which two different types of species, say ant and acacia trees, they derive some sort of benefits from their interaction. Yeah, and we thought that was kind of helpful because there's different forms of mutualism. There could be facultative mutualism, where basically the species interact and they benefit, but they don't depend on one another. It's kind of like voluntary or optional if you think about it. Yeah, it's like if you think about little cleaner fish from manta rays, that would be an example of that. There's also a form that's called obligate mutualism, which is a strictly interdependent relationship where both species only survive if they are in this interaction. And if you take one of the elements away, the other species will also die. Yeah, so some sperm and fungus and trees, stuff like this, some of them are obligate mutualistic relationships. And the third one is conditional, which is basically the in-between version, an interaction that can be mutualistic or not, that depends on certain conditions. So it could be beneficial, it's not strictly dependent, it depends really on the circumstance in which you're in. Now, our idea was that we can think about the somatic entanglement between the human body and the digital device in similar ways, meaning that somatic entanglements are mutualistic that emerges from the interactions of humans with body digital devices. And it could take the form of a facultative entanglement, where we don't depend on the device for vital bodily function or for survival, but using it gives it certain benefits. Yeah, like Tesla suit in gaming. you don't have to use them, but if you do use them, you get another dimension of immersion. You get some more responses during training. It's kind of useful, but if you take it out, you take it out and nothing much happens, right? So sort of like it's only a good thing. There are cases of obligate mutualism or obligate entanglement where people need to interact or the user is entirely dependent on the digital device for survival or essential bodily function. That's in many medical situations, that's the case, right? Smart pacemakers, and other situations where otherwise like essential bodily function would be significantly impaired or in fact would not be vital anymore. And there could be robotic pill, that's an example here, where we can administer education targeted to targeted areas that otherwise would be unreachable. Yeah. And a third example is conditional, right? Where the assemblage or the connection to the device does provide substantial benefits, but it comes at a cost. Yeah, and then the question, it becomes a benefit cost assessment kind of thing. So, for example, again, closed loop artificial pancreas has a tremendous benefits. It is much better in glucose monitoring and insulin injection for the people, meaning that they significantly enhance their quality of life and they can do certain things that would be very, very difficult otherwise. And a very simple but very prevalent, very salient example is actually sleeping through the night. Yeah. Normally, you get blood sugar spikes and sort of drops in the night, which means that people have to wake up, either they get into shock or they have to wake up in certain intervals, take a reading, inject a pill, go back to sleep, etc. So many of these patients literally never sleep through a night, except if you have such a system that does this automatically for you. So it literally makes you sleep better. But of course, it comes at a cost, namely that, you have a device in your body. You have to do things like you have to make sure that it's Bluetooth connected. You shouldn't run out of your battery because as Adrian said, like if your smartphone isn't there, it's, not charged. There's no button you can push on the thing. Like the only way to control it is digitally. So there are these benefits and costs. So one way to think about these entanglements is to think of them in facultative, obligate, and conditional. Now, the final part of our theorizing then is the question, okay, can we connect this somehow? So we have ways in which we can characterize different manifestations or configurations of the assemblage. And can we make at least conjectures, a proposition, what form of entanglement is more likely to occur? Now, in the last version of the paper, we sort of thought of that you can think of it as configurational theorizing. So where we said, look, we have these different conceptual dimensions, and they sort of, as I said, they go on a spectrum from some end to some other end. And depending on how, strongly we're either on one side or the other, it makes certain entanglements more or less likely to manifest. Yeah, I'll give you one example here. If the agency of a bodily digital device, the way that it operates, if that rests very much with the actor, with the human user, and if the way that the transmission, so the way that the information is processed is sort of in intervals, not just continuous and so forth, and if it's an attached, not implanted device, then it's more likely a facultative than an obligate or conditional entanglement. Because then it's really just optional. And whenever you want, you can take it off, you can turn it off, these sorts of things. So in comparison, if it's the actualization is material, the agency is with the device, it's implanted, it might be an obligate or at least a conditional entanglement. So that's the way that you would read, this figure here. And obviously there's text around it in the paper. So that's what the intent with this paper was, to think about these devices, think about the constellations in which we enter when we start using these devices, and offer a framework, a way to think, a vocabulary, if you want, with concepts and certain ideas of what happens in these constellations. Right? So theoretical vocabulary, conceptual structure. So as you can clearly see, this is a theoretical paper. I mentioned in the beginning, this was the beginning of our work, and we're now doing several empirical pieces of work in different cases of these constellations. Yeah. So, but we wanted to show, how can we think about these devices, the way they interact with the human body, what matters to these interactions, and what are the outcomes out of these interactions. And while we haven't sort of formulated some of these, it's very easy now to think about certain key implications or certain established theories and ideas that this really connects to. The obvious ones are agency and control. if you're in an assemblage that involves a bodily digital device, and depending on how it's configured, you know, and how that assemblage looks like, and the sort of what sort of entanglement you're in, this immediately raises the question of, you know, agency and control. Like who's in charge, who has capability, who has intent, and who has capacity to act. And you know, who controls all of this? Is it the user? Is it the algorithm? Is it a third party like your doctor or you know, whoever else? Is the control exerted symbolically through information or materially through the bodily response? Yeah, you can easily think about it, the device that literally punishes you. Yeah, or you know, or you could think of the other one. Think of it, a digital device that gives you dopamine. Yeah, and like makes you feel good. And things like this. And there's obviously other sorts of situations. Yeah, so it does connect to certain. I'm not saying this is necessarily revamping these ideas about agency controls, but they provide very interesting, not unique, but probably revelatory, if not rare or extreme cases of agency and control. So the way that I think about the smart loop, the closed loop anti-official pancreas system, I think this is an extreme case of agency. In the best case, it allows you to do things that you would not be able to do otherwise in your life. Yeah, so I mentioned the sleeping better. There are cases where these systems allow women to have kids, to go through pregnancy, which for some parts of diabetic female patients is otherwise impossible, except when the device allows you to do this. So this is a form, like the agency to create life. At the other end of the spectrum, it has the agency to end your life, right? So it, like, agency can't get more extreme than that. Give life, take life away, right? So I think that this is an interesting one, that we have, that these sorts of assemblages feature cases in which these classical notion of agency and control are taken to the extreme. Yeah. So, for example, in the control, again, Dionysus and Allen, they wrote several years ago. They wrote about this role reversal when humans no longer use the machines, but the machines use using. So the metaphor of the Matrix, right? It's also an old movie by now, but the idea that, you know, like we're feeding data generators into digital devices, or the Internet of Body, which is a very multi-billion-dollar enterprise already. So, but of course, there's now that you have this framework, there's lots of theoretical implications. The ones that we discussed in the paper that I find interesting, one of them is sort of a prescriptive design / future making type of research. Why I ask people would say design research. Now that you understand a little bit better sort of different aspects of the assemblages and the sort of outcomes that these assemblages and the interactions they produce, now, how do we design them in the best ways, or the most desirable ways, which may or may not be the best? Yeah, best for whom, desirable for whom, right? So, for example, if you have assemblages where the agency rightfully rests with the device, how can you build user-driven management that sort of keeps that in check? How do you build checks and balances for a system in which the agency or the autonomy or the auto key rests with the device rather than the human? Yeah. In some situations, that's exactly what you want. Think about underage kids. My sister is cognitively handicapped, so she can't make decisions about her body. It would be pretty useful to have a system do that for her, but someone probably wants to have checks and balances and stay in control of that. Yeah, so that is interesting in terms of prescriptive design-oriented advice, and sort of this emerging body that is about future making and prospective or desirable futures, which we can build because these are not, you know, organizational futures or societal futures. These are technological futures. We built these things, right? We can design, we can redesign, we can change them. The other very obvious one, this is theoretical paper, lots of theoretical ideas and, yeah, sort of early propositions, but it's obviously limited. The material on which we base it is limited. They need testing, right? We need some proper testing of some of these ideas and some falsification of these ideas. And a very important aspect here is our theorizing is necessarily frozen in time. So I mentioned that we've been at this for several years. When we started, there was no big AI or generative AI boom. Now, so in our paper, we don't talk about AI at all, but it's very simply to think about these devices having some sort of artificial intelligence inserted into them. Imagine a a pacemaker that is connected to an LLM. Do you want that? Right? So it's very easy to bring AI into the conversation. We didn't because it was frozen in time, but if you did the same conversation 2 years from now, you definitely have to think about systems that are as capable as modern AI systems are. So agency I mentioned, right? So the agency and control. The one thing that I find interesting, if you think about control, is I think there is a new means of control, a new mode. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a paper where one of the key points about iPhone repair, where I said one of the key points is that there is different means through which we can exert control, from algorithmic means, but also to physical means. I can make devices more or less easy to, sort of disassemble and so forth. We have a similar situation here. There's one way of using algorithm, like in the famous Uber case, where the algorithm nudges you and tells you to do certain things and pick up certain riders and do whatever. Is very different doing that from a psychological, behavior, or a physiological place of control. Imagine devices like in oh geez, I forgot the book. Anyway, old book where we use technology to punish people, yeah, or to reward people physiologically in their body, yeah. And finally, another thing that we haven't talked about and we don't do in this paper, but obviously this has ethical dimensions to it, both in analytical ethics, sort of like what are the ethics of these sorts of situations, as well as normative ethics. How do we want these systems? How do we want these assemblages to operate? How do we want them to design them? How do we deal with responsibility, authority, accountability in these sorts of issues, both in the sense of how is it and how should it be? Yeah. So one interesting one, again, we haven't touched upon this, but if you read up on some of the cases where bodily digital devices are involved, especially there are some interesting communities that call themselves body grinders. These are people that voluntarily insert electronic devices into their body with a view of enhancing themselves. So this could be you have an RFID chip somewhere, you have electronic fingerprint sensors, you have a flash drive somewhere, all sorts of weird things. And of course you have people that do performance enhancing things like in competitive sports and other types of arenas, not dissimilar to doping, except that we now use technologies instead of medication. And what does it say about you saying I'm a professional artist, or I'm a professional competitor, or I'm a whatever I am? So there's some interesting aspects to identity here. There is interesting aspects in terms of performance, competition, comparability, and all these sorts of things. So lots of issues that you can start thinking about. Right. Now, final slide, I promise. No, second to last, sorry. So some broader implication is, I started with this, is the body, the connection to the human body, you can think of as a boundary to the digital object. But a couple more. So first of all, there are other types of constellations in which we might think about body technology assemblages. One obvious one's in physical access control. And this is something that we all see and know, like we all know, have, either like eye recognition or thumb recognition. We all know that in the future we will have banking transaction and all sorts of other online digital access control through biometrics, like literally from our body. That's not too far off, whether that be security, doors and whatnot, finances, transactions, stuff like this. Gaming and professional sports, I mentioned a couple of times, a very unique type of context where we think about, fairness, competition, think about world records, whatever. There is an important aspect to inclusion here as well, in terms of using the body devices to enhance the capability of people to partake in activities that otherwise they couldn't. Yeah, so I mentioned the simple example of diabetic female patients being able to carry birth. Or you can easily think about other situations where technology use might be bodily impaired. So that's a very fascinating dimension that we haven't talked about, and that also connects here as a broader implication from this. And another way to think about beyond this is that you can think about the bodily boundary, the bodily interface. In a way, is a particular kind of a physical digital interface. Yeah, so we know physical digital. There's some unique things that happen at the interface. If you think about digital products, yeah, like so this device is still digital and it's also physical. And in a way, anything that's in my body is also physical in a way. But of course, it's sort of different, right? So one of them is usually in digital product innovations, we have physically designed and digitally designed objects, but they're all man-made artifacts. Here, we have a physical hybridity or boundary where one of them is a man-made artifact and the other one is a naturally occurring living being, right? So that's a little difference in kind there. And again, I mentioned this very quickly, only briefly. It's very easy to think about situations, and as AI penetrates more, at the moment we see AI mostly only in digital or online only text, but there is work where we see AI crossing physical boundaries already. So that at the moment it's sort of in physical construction, in physical products, and in sort of these types of objects. We see that in buildings and so forth, where they operate physical things. But you can also think of them as being able or being intelligent enough to operate the human body, not just our world and our objects and our, other type pieces of systems. So another way to think about that. So that's the end. As I said, the paper is back on our desk for another round of revisions. We're slowly seeing the end of the tunnel, I hope, but it's still a lot of work to do. But this is the way that it is. I do thank you. Listen to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Stay in touch. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions. I must have shell-shocked everyone. There's no one saying anything.
No, I will. I mean, if only to kick off the conversation. But if there's anybody who'd like to go before me, I'd be. Oh yes, there is. So I'd rather somebody else, only because I think I'd like to give them the chance, if that's all right, Jan. So
Sure.
And I'll let you lead. It's Elimar, but I'll yeah.
Hi everyone. Hi Jan. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Yeah, I like the topic. I'm working on similar things. And needless to say, it's super relevant, super complex, understanding these bodily consequences of digital and hybrid technologies. So thanks a lot for the presentation. Really enjoyed the multiple examples that you used. And I'd like to hear from your own take, and also the reviewers and editors, in regards to the issue of why entanglement. Why aren't we talking about a relation when we talk about mutualism? In biology, we don't say, but at least usually we don't say that the clownfish and the anemone are entangled. So why are you using this specific expression, and how did the reviewers think about that?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. So one of the key tasks we have to do now is that people don't quite buy it, and also don't quite buy this analogy to the mutualistic relation that we know from biology, because I haven't paid a lot of willfully didn't go into detail there, but this notion of the benefit to the different parties involved in the mutualistic relationship. What exactly does it look like for the device? Like, how does it benefit, right? So anyway, so long story short, we're probably going to move away from that. A much simpler way, our thinking at the moment, we haven't developed that enough, but you can also think of that as just a mutually, that's a form of mutual dependency. And we know a lot about dependencies. It could be shared, it could be pooled, it could be, whatever. So we're thinking that we might just make that a lot simpler and think about that, we are creating some sort of interdependencies, and we could probably characterize the different ways in which interdependencies manifest. Now, the interesting thing about that one would be, I hope, again, that's the part we still have to do, is that we know what dependency leads to. Right. So at the moment we stop with entanglement, but we don't have a dependent variable for the entanglement. We don't say, look, the performance goes up or down or whatever. But with dependencies, if we connect it to dependencies, we know a lot what happens from dependencies in terms of cost, in terms of control, in terms of coordination, in terms of, all sorts of things. So that might be a way to actually make the theorizing a little bit more interesting, in the sense that we can more readily connect to classical or not so classical outcome variables. such as what is the performance of the assemblage, or what are the costs or the coordination involved in maintaining such an assemblage. So that is probably the biggest working area that we still have, in that the notion of somatic entanglement continues to be difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll just kick in, but again, as I said, so again, I really, really think this paper is so interesting. I think you touch on so many issues, and I think that would be one of the things sort of made me pause at the same time. While it's intriguing to see various vignettes which are almost on a scale of how inside they are and how closed a loop it is, or how external they are, like the suit, where if you punch it, you get a sensation, probably a representation, or using your word, symbolic version of the punch or the knife or whatever that goes inside you. But I am you know, you talk about control, you talk about, and then you bring in lumen as well. Sorry, autopoiesis. So basically, you're talking about lumen's ideas, and you're really getting up there with all kinds of. So I'm very nice. All I'm saying is I'm wondering if your configuration at the end of it is going to be something meaningful enough, because it's nice and it's indicative. And I would have thought somewhere halfway through that paper, that would be a very useful idea. But as a conclusion, I'm wondering if there was at least one theme or one issue that you could really develop and deepen, because you've got beautiful vignettes or data, whichever way you show it. I'm not totally bought in with the idea of entanglement either, because I don't see these as in a socio-material way of actually being
No.
so intertwined with each other.
No, they're not. They're not.
But-
So, yeah, it's a very different. Yeah.
And one of the things that sort of triggered to me when I was thinking about this is mostly from a project that at that time, my PhD supervisor was talking about, was digital drugs. So basically how you can take so I kept thinking about all your devices, and yes, they're digital. They have a very strong digital component, in the sense, meaning a hardware, physical one as well. But none of them are pure just digital, unless, of course, I've missed something. So I was wondering what happens when it's just going to be information that's being fed through us, like algorithms and so on, purely, and how that in its boundaries is actually going to change as well. Because when we think about fluids or anything that is, yes, basically fluids, going back to Anne-Marie Moll's work, I'm trying to think what would happen then, because your boundaries, because then you would get you'd get true entanglement. And is there a case that you have, and how does that actually break or strengthen your theory if you have that? So I know I'm not giving you any help, and I apologize for that. But for me, your wonderful stories and your wonderful vignette led to all sorts of issues. You also talk about agency and control. And what I found interesting is that you've separated them. And I think they are separate, by the way. I totally agree with you. But oftentimes what we find in literature is they talk about control as if it's agency and control are synonyms for each other, and they're not. All right. And that's all to do with, anyway. So yeah, a lot of rambling on my part. I apologize, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in response.
All right, like I took some notes here, so I'm trying to, at least there were 3, 4 topics here.
Yeah.
So one of them is the configuration theorizing. So again, that is, I guess, is an element in flux. Again, reviews weren't quite happy about it, and I get that. I think the bigger issue, the big issue there is that either you do it and then you want to have some really testable propositions, right? And that would be a very classical mid-range, a theory paper where you say being explicitly predictive. And we're actually not trying to do that. So we might take that out, but we want to have a way, and we need to have a way of actually theorizing, being a little bit predictive and assertive, and saying, like, this is a way to think about assemblies, but we can't stop there. We need to say what happens because of these things, right? And configuration theorizing, the way that we've used it, is probably not going far enough. That's why, as said to Elima, an idea would be to sort of go to dependencies and some random outcomes of dependencies, because otherwise we're stuck in the situation, okay, which outcome variables do we pick? So it would all be a little bit arbitrary. The other option that I see is to pick up the notions that come up all the time: trust, agency, control, right? So we could do that as well. So that we haven't settled on. So, and now, right, you picked the again, a key working area, entanglement. So just to reiterate what you said, no, we don't mean it at all in that social material sense, also because I don't buy that. But that's a different point. But I get it. It's a confusing, like it's a term that probably hurts us more, than it does. So about the nothing is really purely digital. That's by design. So that's why we also always talk about digital devices. So sort of some actual physical computational things, not just information flowing through the body. In fact, the purely informational aspect of it all, we definitely excluded also because I don't see how data flowing through my body is creating a bodily response. Something has to actuate something in my body. Right. And I think that is the key distinction, for example, to Tobita James and the work on wearables, where I have wearables and they read my body and they tell me what to do, and they have very symbolic and sometimes even slightly material responses telling me what to do. I think that's a world of difference between that and a device that is in your body doing something to your body, to the biochemistry of it, or to your somatic shell, right? So I think that's the key difference. And there, so just information flowing, passing through that wouldn't be it, right? So it's also like the immune digital twin. We ended up excluding it for the same reason. It is bodily, certainly. It has bodily intent, bodily goals, body, all of that, except that it doesn't do anything to your body. Like not in itself. It needs an actuator. The actuator in this particular case very often is a medical professional. Someone else does something to the body, but the immune digital twin doesn't do anything, right? It needs the coupling, it needs the actuation. And the whole point of the immune digital twin is to actually build a representation of your body somewhere outside of your body. So this is not in the what we now call entanglement. This is not directly coupled, entangled with your body, right? So that's my response there. So I hope I responded to many of your points.
Oh, no, you did. And seriously, and I'm just thinking that what you started off with was your basically systems theory idea. I thought that's where you had probably the greatest strength because you were using something, meta theory, sure, but you were actually trying to explain those ideas in a really nice, close way that was leading us somewhere to see something different in whether you call it somatic entanglement or somatic something else. Eventually, but I think I would stay there, but again, that's up to you. But I think there's something very, very interesting happening in that space.
Thank you, Mark. John. There you are.
Hello, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, and that was fascinating. And I think what you're doing is venturing into an entirely new, I would even venture to say, sort of way of theory. I don't know how appropriate existing theories are to really explain, you know, this relationship, devices in our bodies. So I praise you for being sort of sort of venturing into this area because that's the future for sure. I think what I was just reflecting on the previous comments. When we talk about entanglements, for me, it kind of implies some kind of interplay where the technology gradually is there's some element of flexibility where it's adapted to how it works, and there is some kind, to become an entanglement, there needs to be mutual shaping and reshaping over time. This technology quite rigid, quite fixed, and doesn't really, it's very for very specific purposes. So I'm wondering if that entanglement actually happens over time, or if it actually just serves a purpose, immediate, very fixed and rigid purpose. But I guess my point was not entirely about it. It's more that like the notion of agency here is for me slightly problematic in the sense that I think agency implies intention, and we've had many discussions previously about that, and I don't really see, it's so limited, the role of the technology and the impact. It's very for a specific purpose. For me, because of even the way you are theorizing, this is more inductive, it's ground up, and you're really listening to what the users, their perceptions are of what the value of these devices is. And I think from what I could hear is more sort of empowerment. So they see more as, instead of surrendering their agency, it was more like, I feel like this adds to my bodily functions, or my health, or, this gives me superpowers in the sense that instead of surrendering, I could hear the opposite. It's like, no, I want this because without this, I couldn't do something. So it's almost like I feel more power in the user side than on the technology side. So surrendering agency to the technology for me almost implies the opposite of what I could see. And I think the story of empowering and giving capacities to the users with technology seem to be a much stronger theme coming through. But
Yeah.
obviously you're in the fourth round and you don't want to,
No, we're making so
mention
much.
too much, but I thought I would just share my observation.
I like it very much.
Fascinating.
I like it very much, but I think I can respond to this because this version, this model that I'm showing you is actually a little bit old and it's actually slightly wrong if you think about it. And I think it connects to your point about agency. I don't disagree. So when I think about agency, I actually think about three elements, right? So sort of the intent and the capacity and then the actual performance, like the carrying out. Now, we have several of these elements here, right? We have intent, we have actualization, which is the performance of agency, like how does it actually do anything? And then what we actually here call agency is who has sort of control over the action, right? Who has the capacity to act. So we have intent, capacity, and performance here in slightly different ways. But what I think is a little bit misleading or miswrong here in this model here, we draw it as a connection between these two things, but that's not technically correct. So there is the intent is designed or programmed into the device. This is not the intent of the assemblage. There is an intent programmed or designed into the device. So what is the algorithm doing? Is it preventing something or is it reacting to something? That is a given intent that someone built into the device. And of course, when I use it, I may have a very different intent. I can do different things with this. We all know this, right? So I can take the Tesla suit and go shopping if I want to. And I can use it as a heater in winter if I'm cold, So I can do all sorts of weird things with my intent. So intent, what I'm saying is what this figure here is misleading in this particular version is that it's not very clear to where the attributes resides, to which elements. Is it on the system as a whole, to some of the elements? For example, also what you mean empowerment, you could also see there is an emergent outcome, a form of relational agency that is produced through the assemblage, right? So through the assemblage, we are being empowered to do certain things like sleep through the night, having babies and whatnot that otherwise we couldn't have. And this is an emergent outcome from the assemblage, from the entanglement, whatever. Yeah. So we could also pay agency another part in this figure as an outcome of this. So the agency, in terms of intent, relate to the assemblage. There's intent and capacity and actualization that is in the device. And there's agency as an outcome. So all of that is yet unclear, and that is still something that we're working on in basically sharpening it, right? Being clear of what exactly we mean or not mean. I don't want to make this, or we never wanted to make this only about agency. This connects a little bit to Ma's point. We want it to be deliberately broad, and therefore you need to be abstract, and that means you can only touch upon certain things. You can't really talk about all sorts of things. For example, there's no ethics here, there's no risk here, there's no trust here. Even though all these things obviously matter, and they also mattered in the cases that we studied. Yeah, but you got to draw the line somewhere. And one of the things that the system theorizing has allowed us to do is simply scope, like saying, look, trust falls off the table, right? So you can't talk about everything here. And that's the danger with these types of papers that they're theorizing at that level, that it's really hard to say like what's in and what's out of the theorizing. Here's number 3. All right, now we have a more. Ich komme sofort.
Thank you, Jan. That's great. Nice to see your family.
Machen wir so.
Hey, little guy. But seriously, this is really, really interesting, and I'm totally on board with what you said, Jan, at the end, where when you theorize at that level, it really is a big question of what you bring in and what you leave out, because the fact is, reviewers are never, in general, never quite completely happy, and there's always. But I did, and again, just summarizing now, the entanglement idea. I can just see certain reviewers who are rigidly in the idea of sociomateriality arguing against this so strongly. So it's usually these kind of words that flare up a lot of unnecessary energy sometimes.
Look, I have to, you know, so like the reviews and the editors have been very constructive, very
You're
developmental.
lucky. Yes.
So first of all, like there's not a big philosophical social material debate that actually hasn't happened.
Okay.
And as I said, like the edit, they're very, I think they want to help us publish this paper. It just takes a long time to actually get this. It's not an easy one to write.
No.
A theorizing paper where they with a weird form of theorizing. It's not as simple as deducing it from some meta theory or the other way around. So it's kind of difficult. But they've been supportive. They're not easy. It's not easy, but it's not that they, you know, we're dealing with evil reviewer two here.
Oh, no, you're lucky.
It's just not a, it's not a simple process. That's all.
Because you really want to explain these devices inside or you know on the convergence of human body as well, and that's where what you're really trying to theorize. Because otherwise, if you were trying to theorize, let's say, just agency, add one element. I'm sorry, I'm saying that it could be any one of the little boxes that you have here. Any one of them could probably be a story in itself as well. But then if you did that, wouldn't it be easier, because you could talk then about delegation, or whether, or using John's understanding. I mean, because it really is, then it would fit into a very specific literature as well. What happens when you're thinking about somatic devices that are inside or at the boundary of the human body? What happens to the body and how we relate to it, and who or what or all of them.
But Ma, the way that I think about it and what the ambition here is we want to have a conversation starter. We don't want to write a small paper about how agency is different.
No. Well, I like agency, but
Yeah,
you call it small, but
you know what I mean? Like I don't want to. We didn't never wanted to write a paper about what happens to agency if a thing is in my body or something like that.
yeah,
But
I
really,
get
we wanted to say like, let's talk. Like we want to have an IS paper that draws attention to the Internet of Body, to bodily digital devices, and invites people to, you know, challenge us, for example, right? So I think it's important that agency features is literally one of the boxes.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the main box.
No, I don't think it is. I
But
think
then maybe it's not, right? So and then the next person should say like you get it all wrong, and you know let's continue, let's expand this conversation. And the best way to do this is to give them something that they disagree with. So I do think it's important to start it, because we don't, frankly, we don't have anything like this. There's no discussion on the Internet of Body. We don't have anything like that in our field, not on this level. And I think that's the point of it. So in a way, it would be a symbolic paper, even more so than a substantive one. I think that's how I think about it. But also that makes it challenging because, as I said, I'm not saying the other ones are easy to write, but they would be more bounded, and they would give you a very stronger point of departure because you have one theory with very clear assumptions, and you know can think about how they might be different in the bodily boundary or whatever, right? So I think that's a very different paper, and it's decisively not one that we wanted to do.
no.
We're doing some of that now empirical, right? So we're taking up some of the ideas and exploring them.
Yeah. And last thing, the middle box, right in the middle, body device linkage. This is where you're bringing in the boundary part in your bigger theory, of course.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, so this is really the environment, like the system theory, like the environment, like the interface to the
I get it.
environment,
Yeah.
and,
Exactly.
which I think is fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, oh God, it is. I mean, seriously, that's the point. There are so many sub ideas coming out of what your bigger theory paper is. I think your research agenda at the end of the paper is probably where you could go crazy and develop
It could
something.
go crazy, but again, we actually cut it down even further and further and further because you know you got to stop somewhere.
Yeah.
And you need to have it somehow sort of eternally consistent with the theorizing, and you can't talk about everything. So so these more aspects about how you write such a paper than the ideas itself. So
That should be a lecture in itself, seriously, because well, we all struggle with that. But this was, I mean, I'm just looking quickly over if anybody's left with a hand up or if I've ended up monopolizing unnecessarily. No, I think you really have stunned people into thinking a lot about things that we don't well, to be honest, we don't really think about enough. I mean, many of us have diabetics in our family, for instance, so we do know about those devices. But if they're all type 2 diabetes rather than type 1, then you have less of these devices as well. So thank you. That was absolutely lovely. I mean it. I've so enjoyed it, and I can't tell you how I look forward to reading your full version of the paper once it's published.
Yeah,
Thank you.
me too.